Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. Thank you for coming on. I'm super excited to chat with you today. I have some personal experiences with mushrooms that I think are just so powerful, and I've seen how they've impacted my life, and I've been trying to find somebody who is an expert, somebody who is knowledgeable in the field of mycology who can come on and talk about this kind of stuff. So with that being said, I'm so excited to be chatting with you today.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. We're going to get deep into the world of fungi.
I'm excited for it. So you're a registered herbalist. Can you maybe just explain what that is, how that's different from a mycologist, and just what your field of work is?
Yeah, absolutely. So my certification is as a registered herbalist of part of this guild. It's called the American Herbalist Guild. And for very layman's terms, we're alternative practitioners. So I see clients, have a clinical practice, and instead of working with a pharmaceutical medication, I use plants. And in my practice particularly, I focus on functional mushrooms. So yeah, it's holistic. It's very, there's a ton of similarities, but also a lot of differences with when you think about, okay, I'm sick and I want to go and treat myself in one way or the other. A lot of my work, I'm trained in what's called the vitalist tradition of herbalism. And so it's the belief and understanding that we have this vital force running through our body. It's like our chi, our life force, right? There's different names and different cultures and traditions all over the world. But it's the idea that our body has evolved and knows how to heal and to heal ourselves given the right tools. So sometimes that means taking things out of our life, right? If we think of this life force, this vital force, like a river that's flowing, right? Our chi, there's sometimes things like in a river that block that force. So that can be like a dam, right? Rocks that are impeding the flow. And what that looks like in our body can look like bad practices, right? Whether it's an inflammatory food group or some sort of lifestyle practice that is basically hindering or inhibiting that life flow. So we remove those obstacles, then we also replenish the body with the nutrients that the body needs to thrive and work optimally. How
did you get into all this stuff? Obviously, you're super passionate about it. I can tell just from hearing you speak.
Yes.
Have you always been into herbs and mushrooms and this type of healing and this type of living?
Great question. I think there's very few little girls who are like, I'm gonna focus on plants and mushrooms as my career. So it was not planned. It was very organic. I was a big environmentalist growing up. My mom fed me hemp cereal and was brewing kombucha on our kitchen counter before it was ever bottled and sold in stores. So I had a little bit of that influence in my household growing up, but it really led me to be this pretty angry, actually, environmentalist. Once I started realizing what was happening with our planet, I was protesting and I was an activist and running all over the place and really sacrificing my own health in that process. And eventually I kind of had this aha moment where I had to make a choice. It was I wasn't able to get out of bed for several days a month. And I was having a very restrictive diet, which I thought was the right thing to do for the planet, right? Raw vegan diet, lowest carbon footprint possible. And it was really, it wasn't working for me. And so I had this choice. It was I can either replenish my body with what I need, right? Eating eggs and fish were the nutrients I needed at that time and get a couple days back a month, or I could sacrifice, right? 2-3 days a month, which adds up. And it was really in an activist mindset. I'm what could I do with that extra time? And so started focusing on my body and healing from within, zone 0 first. And then I started looking around and I'm I was really angry at the world and how are we not all doing better and doing more and waking up to the reality of what's happening with our planet. And it was only through that realization with my own body that I literally started looking at the people in my family and my community and realizing that so many of us have these ailments, a lot of them chronic, whether it's, a diagnosis or not, but whether it's chronic sleep deprivation or headaches or stress or food allergies or, sensitivities to X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, how, if we're not even filled up ourselves, right? If we're showing up every day to the world suboptimally, right, without the nutrients that we need to actually feel our best, how could I expect anyone to show up for something beyond themselves, right? Or even be able to really live their life and their purpose if they're not full. And so there was this big shift that happened from focusing outward and being this environmentalist to turning everything inwards and starting to focus on people. And that felt like a radical shift for the planet, is like, if we could heal the people and through plant medicine, right? If people can realize like, wow, this nettle or this reishi mushroom or this lion's mane, that's what's making me feel alive and vital and my best self. There's innately a desire to protect that medicine, right? It's like we want to keep the things that make us feel good. So the environmental thread is still definitely underlying, but it's really realizing like, in order to change the world in any way, we've got to take care of ourselves first to be whole.
Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like so many people could probably relate to that, of like, they want to serve some bigger purpose. They want to help other people in their lives, but they don't feel 100% themselves. Like, I feel like I hear that story so often.
Wow.
And it's like, the most important thing you can do is honestly be selfish in a lot of ways, is like, take time to exercise, take time to eat good foods and take care of your health. That way you have more energy, you have more to give to other people. So that's so powerful to hear that. So what was like that transition like for you? Like, did you just stumble upon like, oh, I got all these like plants and these herbs and mushroom stuff I can use? Like, what was that transition period like?
Yeah. So in part of my big environmental phase, I became what's called a permaculture designer. So have you heard of permaculture?
I've heard of it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's basically designing any sort of zone. So it can be your house, it can be a community, it can be a city, it can be as close to zero waste and self-sustainable as possible. So it can include everything from natural building to rainwater harvesting to growing food, animal husbandry, beekeeping, like everything that requires us to have a vital whole life, and making that as closed loop as possible. And so I actually moved to a permaculture intentional community for a month, where I did this like deep dive course learning about what it looks like to live fully off the grid, right? Like, what's this extreme? Grew up in Santa Barbara, a ton of wealth. It was like all these people are not happy, and on paper they have like seemingly everything, right? I'm like down the street from Oprah, and it's like, this is the extreme opposite. I'm like, I'm gonna go and see what living off the grid looks like. And it was amazing. It was so powerful to see the community and the bond and the connection to nature. But there was this missing piece, that whenever someone got hurt, there was like a little medicine box that had like Neosporin and Band-Aids and your ibuprofen. And I'm like, there's something wrong with this. Like, if everyone's able to like catch their own water and feed themselves off the land, like compost their own waste and build soil, like, this is awesome. But what about our health? Like, what about when we get sick? And so it kind of sparked this like herbal flame, I guess we could call it. And anyways, with lots of other life turns, I ended up moving to Southeast Asia. I lived there for about 3.5 years. And that's where the herbal medicine piece became really alive for me. I was leading trekking trips in the backcountry. So we would go to different hill tribe villages and live with local people. And medicine men and women are still very alive and well out there, right? In every village, there's one house, one kind of hut where the medicine man or woman lives. And whenever someone gets sick, you go over there, and the medicine person goes out into the forest and collects ferns and barks and mushrooms. And it was amazing. I'm like, this is incredible. And it was like a glimpse into how we've been healing ourselves for thousands of years, except for the last really couple hundred years with the invention of Western medicine in the US. So anyway, I was so inspired by this way of life and this this kind of glimpse into a world that was so foreign to us. I'd never seen something like that growing up in the States. And so I moved back. I formalized my education. I went to grad school in Boulder, Colorado for herbal medicine, opened a private practice. And long story short, the people that were coming to me were like, Danielle, I've tried every practitioner and you're my last resort. So like, this is the end of the road for me. What can you do? And that's a really challenging position to be in. Right. It brought a lot of chronic illness. It brought a lot of autoimmunity, a lot of ailments that the Western world, frankly, was like, we don't have a name for this, or nothing's wrong with you, which, ailments like chronic EMF sensitivity and things that like we don't have a label for. And so within the world of herbal medicine, we have several thousand plants that we can draw on. But I started focusing on mushrooms. And the reason is in these wide range of bodies, whether they were having overactive immune activity or they had compromised immune systems, the common thread among all of them was healing the gut, which means healing the immune system, right? 70% of our immune system is located in our gut. And functional mushrooms, this is where they thrive. We'll get really into it, but they're called immunomodulators. So they're really safe. They're really effective at either stimulating or downregulating immune cell activity based on the body that's ingesting them, which is super cool. So you and I could take the exact same mushroom, same dose, and it would have a different effect in your body than on my body.
Oh, wow.
Based on kind of our baseline. So long story short, I started, it's actually kind of a long story long, huh?
No, I love hearing these.
I just became fascinated with these functional mushrooms. I'm like, why aren't these anywhere? This was about 10 years ago when I started working with them, and they weren't cool. It wasn't trendy. Mushrooms are kind of having a moment right now. That was not the case. But, it wasn't new. Well, the more I started learning about and seeing the vitality coming back in so many clients, it was just amazing. And when you look at the history of functional mushroom use, there's a several thousand-year-old history of humans using these exact species for the ailments that we need them for today. We're just kind of the last to catch on in the West, right? We have this whole mycophobia thing, which is slowly dissipating. But for a long time, we had this like deep fear of mushrooms. And it's so amazing. We're seeing that collapse and dissolve, and the embrace of fungi for so many reasons, right? For medicine, this is really my specialty, but also in the mental health space with psychedelics, we're seeing a rise in culinary mushrooms being used. So it's an exciting time to be in mushrooms.
That's so cool. Yeah, mushrooms definitely seem trendy. And I think it's even better that you found it. It seems like more organically, like just through your own life experiences. It's not like you were scrolling and saw some influencer talking about mushrooms. It's like a more wholesome, organic way, which I think makes it even better. So was that kind of, I'm assuming, along the trajectory where you decided you needed to write a book about this? And I started reading the book or listening to it. I've got the audio version.
Cool.
I think I'm like 2 hours into it, and it's so good. Like, I loved hearing the history of adaptogens and like kind of what you explained, but more long form of people have been using these things for thousands of years, and this like kind of all the negativity that comes with Western medicine and how it's just treating a symptom. It's not treating like the actual person. I thought that was so powerful. So I'm curious to hear, like, was there a moment where you're like, man, I gotta write a book about all this?
It was Taro's idea. So yeah, I joined forces with Sigmatic about 6 years ago, and part of what my biggest passion is educating people. Even in my clinical practice, my goal when I feel that I've done a successful job with a client is when they no longer need me, which is kind of the opposite of our Western model, where it's like, keep coming back, have someone hooked on something. I'm like, I want to empower my clients to know their body, understand that our body is constantly giving us messages and signals, and we just have to learn to listen to them and then know what tools we need to bring us back into balance. And so yeah, in part of that, the education piece, I think there's just so much more that as a general society, we need really accessible tools to learn about these super, super powerful ingredients, the most nutrient dense ingredients in the world. And especially today, we are so stressed. We're more stressed than we've ever been as a society. And that's not just because of us, right? It's not like part of it is we're demanding a lot more of ourselves and we're grinding in our jobs, but a lot of it is stress that's out of our control. It's just the amount of pesticides, herbicides in our soils that are then in our foods, which causes stress on our body, right? Microplastics, and I mean, it's pollution. It's so next level. We've never, as human beings, dealt with a level of environmental stress, which then leads to physical, spiritual, emotional stress. And the functional mushrooms, there's 5 of them that are also adaptogens, but several other plant adaptogens are premier herbal medicines for supporting the body's stress response naturally, holistically, safely. And so, there's this gap. It's like, okay, we're all over here, super, super stressed, and we have the most powerful allies at our fingertips, where for thousands of years, these were very hard to get your hands on, right? Like you'll read in the reishi chapter, you had to be part of the royal family to even use reishi mushroom, right? If you were a commoner, by law, if you found reishi out in the forest, you had to go and deliver it to the emperor because it was illegal for you to take it. It was that powerful, right? Each one of these adaptogens have these wild stories where people would, go on these big pilgrimages to find them, or with cacao, it was used as a currency, like really, really revered status. And today we can get them on Amazon. Like we can go over to Whole Foods and get them. And yet we're not using them to the level that we could be and should be to be experiencing their benefits. So that's really where the book comes in. Its goal is to be a bridge between where we're at as a society and where we could be. Right? You read the book. I started it like, imagine waking up, like your full vital self. How incredible would that feel? And we have these tools like right there, ready to support us. And it's just the knowledge. We need that knowledge in a really simple guide. So the goal was to have this guide that, there's all these like big herbal textbooks that are 500 plus pages on adaptogens, or these kind of like shitty blogs online that have no backing and no clinical data to support them. And so this book is really a bridge between the two. It's like, if you've never heard of adaptogens, you can jump in and understand. But if you're a lifetime user, we also combed through over 1,000 clinical studies and put the most gold standard, right, human double-blind placebo-controlled trials to validate the traditional use cases for each of these 21 adaptogens.
Yeah, I love the way that the book, I love a few things about the book. One, I love how it's broken up into the defend, perform, and restore, I think is what it is. So it's like, it's just easy. Like you can jump into, okay, wow, I feel sick. What can I take? It's like, it's a guide more than anything, which I love. Maybe the best way to go about the podcast as a whole is just like kind of going through the way you guys have the book set up is like, if you defend, falls more into like immune system, if you're trying to fight something off, and then go into, I think where I think a lot of people are gonna find the most interest is in the perform side, just because a lot of people listening to this are runners, athletes, people kind of in the sports world, and then the restore, which also I think has equal amount of importance when it comes to like recovery and sleep and making sure that your body is refreshed and restored as much as possible. So maybe we kind of just walk through like each chunk of the book, and like I don't know if you want to like go through basically how the book is set up, almost where it's these different adaptogens and how people can use them, the right amounts of them, and so on. I love how some of the like adaptogen and mushroom type stuff can be, I don't think woo woo is the right term. I think to a lot of people it seems woo woo because it's like, oh, it's energy and it's like comes from the earth and it seems like hippie almost, and it's like not quite as mainstream. If you live in the US, it's not westernized. Right. So I like that the book has that element, which there's obviously a ton of merit to it, but it's also for people that seem to maybe be on the fence still, is all this science that's backed up, all the science that backs up all these claims and what people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. Now we can have like hard objective data saying, oh, this stuff actually works. I think that's probably one of my favorite parts about the entire book is that balance of like, this is what humans have been doing for thousands of years. This is like connecting it to chi and all these different energy systems, as well as the like scientific data perspective too. So
yeah, it's so important to have both. It's like whether you believe in anecdotal evidence, right? Like I want to know that people have been using this and what did they experience? What were their side effects? What were their benefits? And I want to see that experience over and over and over again. We have that, right? We have several hundred, if not several thousand, depending on the species, years of that anecdotal evidence documented with these adaptogens, most of them. And then we also, in the last really since like the late 40s, early 50s, we have this amazing bulk of clinical research to validate the traditional use case. So wherever you are on that spectrum, no matter how woo-woo or not you are, this information can be relevant.
I love that. That was a much more concise way of explaining it.
Oh, no.
that was perfect.
We got there together.
That's perfect. So maybe like, do you want to just kind of walk through, we'll start with like the defense side of things. Like what we can recommend to people for these different adaptogens. And then maybe also before we go into that, how do you define adaptogen? Obviously mushrooms can fall into that, herbs can fall into that. How do you define adaptogens?
Yeah, great question. So zooming out, big picture, adaptogens are an umbrella category of plants and fungi that all have three key things in common that unite them. But when we think about these groupings of plants and mushrooms, it might be easier to think of other groupings that might be more familiar. So we have plants that relax the nervous system, right? We call them nervines. Some of them that are a little stronger, we call sedatives, right? So chamomile, lavender, to the skullcaps and passion flowers, right? It's this group of herbs that help relax our nervous system. Then we have digestives, right? We have another name for them is carminatives, like warming spices, the gingers and cinnamons and nutmegs of the world. So we have all these different groupings based on what the plants do. And adaptogens are another grouping like that. So the number is debated, right? The word adaptogen wasn't actually coined until 1947, which you recently learned by Dr. Nikolai Lazarov in Russia. But it comes from the Latin word adaptere, which means to fit or to adjust. So this is really key. With most of our plant medicine, plants, or depending on what herb we're using, push our bodies in one direction or another, right? So you take something like coffee, right? Matcha, green tea, and it's stimulating, right? It's an upper, it's giving us this uplifting energy. Other things will put us to sleep, right? Other things will, like echinacea, will activate our immune system, where other things might suppress it. So what's unique about adaptogens is this, sounds silly, but this ability to adapt, as we talked about, to the needs of the body that's ingesting them. Right. So there's three things that they all have. The first is that they're non-toxic, really, really key. There's many herbs that you might not think are non-toxic, but there's actually a dose that kind of pushes you over an edge, right? And can lead to negative side effects. Even garlic can be toxic, right? Super strong antibacterial, culinary and herbal medicine, but there's a toxic component. There's a non-toxicity to all of our adaptogens. And part of that speaks to their use case as almost more like foods than medicines, right? They're used long-term, they're used consistently, mostly for several days, several weeks. Some of them are used like even for several years ongoing to help build and maintain this level of health in the body, as opposed to an herb you just use for a couple days or a couple weeks to treat a specific symptom. So they're all non-toxic. They're all normalizing. Which is really interesting, but most of them work on our HPA axis, right? Basically our body's ability to cope with stress. And so they're all like, if a lot of people think of adaptogens, they think like, oh, that supports stress, which is not wrong, right? That's a large component of them. But a really interesting piece of that normalizing is that they also are non-specific in the way that they act in the body. So mushrooms, great example. We talked a little bit about this word immunomodulating. So essentially what that means is modulation as opposed to stimulation or suppression. So they have the ability, think about adapting, balancing, finding equilibrium to either stimulate or downregulate. Another good example to kind of drop into this this kind of concept is with cacao. I think it's a more common food, right? Where our chocolate comes from, the cacao bean, the Theobroma cacao tree. And cacao is, first of all, the most nutrient-rich food on planet Earth. Cacao is incredible.
Really?
Not like a Hershey's chocolate bar, but like a true cacao. And it's an adaptogen. And when we think about this non-specific nature, cacao is one of our richest natural food sources of magnesium, right? Magnesium is our mineral for relaxation, right? Think of like an Epsom salt bath or taking magnesium for constipation or for a headache, right? It helps the body relax on a cellular level.
I started taking magnesium last like week or so, like right before bed. I think it's magnesium glycinate, whatever kind is best for before bed.
Yeah,
it
like
definitely works. It for sure works.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Shout out. There's a company called Hello Ned that has the best magnesium on the planet. It's also the #1 nutrient deficiency in the American diet, which is crazy. It used to be really abundant in our soils and then our foods. We don't get magnesium anymore. So when we think about like how stressed we are, it's like, well, yeah, no wonder we don't have the mineral that's literally allowing us to relax and unwind. So most of us should take magnesium. It has 300 functions in the body. So important. But tangent, with cacao, magnesium, it also has, some people might take cacao or a hot chocolate and feel like a little bit of energy. That's because of a compound called theobromine, which is a sister compound to caffeine, right? Very similar molecularly. So depending on where your body is at, are you, really rested and you've gotten a great night of sleep? Maybe you take that little bit of cacao and you feel like, wow, I feel really energized and ready for the day and I'm in this flow state. Other people, if they're really deprived and deficient, they're exhausted, they take that cacao, the magnesium might have, think of it as a louder effect in the body, which will allow them to utilize that magnesium better and fall into that place of rest or sleep. So there's this non-specific action, right? It's very opposite of the way we typically think about medicine, where in our Western world, most of our Western medicine comes from a constituent that's originally in a plant or a fungus, but it's isolated, right? So it's this one isolated compound to be able to have a repeatable effect in every body that takes them. Now, when we look at whole plants, whole fungi, there's hundreds of compounds working together. And cacao, we just mentioned too, theobromine and magnesium, right, that have this like gas brake push-pull effect. But that's the commonality with our adaptogens, is they can have this, non-specific action, which makes them a little bit elusive, but also so powerful.
Dang, that's powerful. Would cacao then fall under the restore section of the book? I haven't got to that part of the book yet, so I don't know.
Good question. Why we broke up into categories is because, first of all, I don't want people thinking of adaptogens all as like one smattered thing. They exist on a spectrum, right? So there's some that are much more gentle, nourishing, and there's others that can be a little more pushy and stimulating. That said, we talk about, when we go through each of them, we talk about their 3 key benefits, or the 3 like most likely things that you might feel when incorporating adaptogen into your diet, because it could be one of those 3 things. It could be something totally different, right? But we're so conditioned to be like, what is this for, right? We're like, give me a label, give me a word, marketing, like this
Right.
for this. And that's just not how adaptogens work. It's really not how plant medicine works. It's more like matchmaking of like, let's find the right ingredients for your body that will bring you into your best self. But yeah, so I guess it's hard for me to label and be like, cacao, yes, restore. I believe we put it in the restorative category, just because it is more gentle. It's not like the ginsengs that are really going to like kick you and give you this big jolt. But yeah, they all exist on this spectrum, and you can start. I mean, the way that we organized the book was to help people start generally in these categories. Like, are you wanting to build up this baseline of your body, focus on your gut health, your immune system? That's really where the defend adaptogens come into play. And the key mushroom in that defend category is chaga. Chaga is super cool. I think I have some chaga in my apothecary behind me that I can show you.
Oh, nice.
This is a real chaga.
Look at that.
This is from
Dang.
the largest birch forest in the world. So chaga is a parasitic mushroom. It grows almost exclusively on birch trees. So at Sigmatic, we wild harvest ours from the largest birch forest in the world. It's called the taiga. It's in Siberia. But yeah, probably really different than what most people think of when they think of a mushroom.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. So
It's a little pixelated on my end. It'll look clear on the podcast, but right now, to me, it just looks like a big black blob.
That's pretty accurate. It's called a conch. Yeah, it's pretty much a big black blob. It looks like almost like a canker sore or something on the side of a birch tree. And when you get the chaga from birch, which is super, super important, I'll mention, this is like a whole nother podcast topic, but about the similarities of humans and fungi. We share about 50% of our DNA with them. One of the critical crossovers is that unlike plants can photosynthesize, get their energy and nutrients from the sun, and turn it into energy and fuel for them to grow. We can't, right? We obviously need food. We need external nutrients. So do fungi. So do our mushrooms. So most of our functional mushrooms, they grow on trees, as opposed to like poisonous mushrooms, some culinary varieties, psychedelic mushrooms mostly grow from the earth. So just like basic distinction there is that these grow on trees. And so they have much more of a like bitter, earthy, almost like tree bark flavor to them. Very different than what most people think of when they think of a mushroom. So just important to clarify, like if you hear mushroom coffee and you're like, what the hell are you guys doing? This actually tastes a lot like coffee, right? This is like a great coffee alternative. It's bitter. It brews like a jet black color. And this is the most antioxidant rich food on the planet. So when we talk about the literally Taro's first book, Healing Mushrooms, we're doing all sorts of plugs and resources here, but has a great visual of the ORAC chart, which is how we measure antioxidants. And you can see things that we typically think of are high antioxidant load, like blueberries and acai. Chaga is like 5 to 10x that. It's wild. So important as athletes, right? We know that antioxidants fight free radicals and we release free radicals. It's inevitable. But when we exercise, also when we're exposed to the sun, when we age, when there's toxins in the air. So in order to keep our system strong and avoid free radical damage, which can lead to a plethora of downhill negative side effects, we want to replenish our system with high antioxidant foods, chaga being the creme de la creme of that category.
Dang. So because this one grows on a tree instead of out of the earth or like out of the ground, I know I'd love for you to explain this separately after this question, but the mycelium, does every mushroom have mycelium technically, or even if it doesn't grow out of the earth? Or maybe explain that, and then explain what mycelium is, because I think it is one of the most fascinating things on planet Earth, maybe.
It truly is. Okay, so let's do like fungal life cycle 101. So the first phase of a fungal life cycle is a spore. You can think of a spore like a fungal seed, and a spore needs to find a compatible mate to then begin to germinate. And it begins to germinate and create what's called a hyphae, which is like a little tubular string is what it looks like, right? And this hyphae grows and grows and grows, and the conglomeration of the hyphal network is what's called mycelium. So if anyone's dug in soil, right, or have been a gardener, that white stringy kind of thread-like substance, that's all mycelium. And it's essentially, it does so much more than this, but you can very like layman's term, think of it like the root system of what eventually turns into a fruiting body or a mushroom itself. So all mushrooms, yes, will have mycelium. There's actually many fungi that don't fruit into mushrooms. Right, we know there's fungi that live as black mold and all sorts of other fungi that we don't love, but all of our mushrooms begin, right, with a spore, with this hyphal spreading, with this mycelial network. And that mycelium is fascinating. We need like a whole podcast on mycelium, but in all of our soil, we know now mycelium is within over 90% of plants on Earth. So it's literally within the cell walls and growing in tree barks and leaves, and it is this amazing relationship with plants. But eventually, depending on several conditions, typically temperature and moisture and humidity, right? Oxygen, sunlight, the mushroom will be basically forced to fruit, which is the last phase of its life cycle. So mycelium, this mat becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. A common place that mushroom fruits are after a fire, right? So a fire sweeps through, if anyone's a forager, and then that mycelium is like, oh shit, this isn't a great place for me to live anymore. I should fruit, which is like, think of an apple on a tree, right? It's the last phase of the life cycle. So I'm going to fruit, and then the spores are typically within either the gills, or a lot of our functional mushrooms, like this is reishi, have what are called polypores. Think of like pores on a face, right? So the spores live within this, and then so the mushroom fruits is the real reishi, by the way, not lacquered or anything. And then it drops the spores, and spore distribution happens, then the life cycle begins again. So that's kind of the basic, right? And you can look up fungal life cycle, you can see that all in images, but essentially, think of the spores into the hyphae, into the mycelium, into the fruit, and then to the spores again.
And mycelium is like it's all sort of connected, right? And I think maybe it's you, or it might have been in the book, say that like if one part of a mushroom or like the mycelium is like sick or something, then it like affects the other ones. Like I can't remember the phrase. It's like like if there's catastrophe somewhere within the thing, I can't remember the right phrase, then it's like affecting other parts of it or something like that.
Mycelium is freaking wild. It's so cool. And we're just like really on the precipice of literature and discovery of just what's capable of. But yes, it's essentially this living message conducting system where you can think of all the hyphal threads that make the mycelium as like little tubes, and the tubes are transferring both nutrients and information, right? And this mycelium network can be massive. It's actually the largest organism on planet Earth is a mycelial network up in Oregon, a honey fungus species.
The largest living organism
is mycelium.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right? Mycelium's under us, like everywhere, no matter where we are on planet Earth, like both of us in Austin and Los Angeles. Every step we take, we're stepping on about 300 miles of a mycelial biomass anywhere on the planet. Pretty incredible. And it's sensing and sending messages and signaling and nutrients, right? So there's so much within herbalism that when you really understand the role of fungi, you're like, fungi are like the secret agents behind the herbal medicine, where we revere certain plants for the nutrients, we call them the compounds or the constituents within them, but it's really the associated fungi that's responsible for delivering those nutrients to the plant. And they go through all sorts of extremes to be able to deliver nutrients and messages to its associated plant partners, right? So like the hyphae have these like really enzymatic rich tips. And so they basically like dissolve what's in front of them and then can break that down and absorb it and bring it into its hyphal tube. So they can like break down rock, they'll break down insects, like all sorts of wild tactics, sometimes miles away. They'll go out and search and find a nutrient that their like host plant needs and then deliver it through this network. And then here you go, plant, to keep that plant healthier, thriving.
That's wild. And fungi they're not like mammals, they're not plants, they're like its own kingdom, right?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so we're part of the animal kingdom, plant kingdom. Fungi are their own entire separate biological kingdom. And this actually wasn't discovered until about, what was it? It was like 30 or 40 years ago that fungi were actually put into their own kingdom, which is wild. So before that, we used to think that fungi were just like a lower form of plant. And then we started realizing they're actually not a lot like plants. They kind of occupy this space that's almost like part animal and part plant in a lot of ways, right? And there's that. So us as humans, I mentioned, we're closer related to fungi than we are to plants. And yeah, there's many similarities between us and fungi, which I think is one of the reasons when we use the right fungi, we can synergize so well with them, and they can do such beautiful healing things for our bodies.
Do you think that fungi or mushrooms are sentient? Because like part of me almost feels like they might be.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some really cool experiments that have happened where we've like tried to see how successful a mycelial network could be at finding the most efficient routes through a subway system. I think it was like in a Japanese subway system.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah.
These engineers being like, okay, what's the most efficient route? And they put mycelium to the test, and they created the most optimal like underground subway system, and found, all these unique ways to get from point A to B that we as humans could not have ever discovered or thought about. Maybe eventually, but basically we're just discovering how powerful and capable mycelium, fungi, fruiting bodies, all of these are for so many aspects of our well-being, whether it's our mental health, our physical health, our environmental health. We haven't even talked about so many other aspects of, mycoremediation and mycoforestry. I mean, we could go on and on. But yeah, I think they're definitely our future.
Dang, that's so amazing. It seems like it reminds me of the ocean a little bit. Like we've only discovered like 10% of the ocean, or probably not even that. It seems like fungi and mushrooms and all this, like the whole plant life and all this stuff, there's just so much unknown still. There's just so much out there.
So much unknown.
That's just untapped. Yeah. I would love to know, okay, maybe we'll dive into the like defend, perform, restore stuff now.
Yeah.
Because I definitely want to know like specific recommendations you would have within each of those different buckets. And then I think obviously one of the most important things, which I'm sure you'll go into, is where to source some of these, because in the book it sounds like there's so many different places you can source these from. Like you said, you can get this shit on Amazon if you really want to. I don't know how good that's going to be, so maybe if you want to say that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about defend, baseline. Chaga is our key functional mushroom, right? Super antioxidant rich, amazing for the immune system. So many other benefits. It's really rich in SOD, superoxide dismutase. It also has melanin, so it's kind of like a sunscreen from the inside out. Really cool, fascinating fungi as a baseline. We add this into a lot of our coffee, so it's great in the morning. You could use it as a coffee alternative. But yeah, I'll make sure, we'll talk about sourcing later, but making sure you're getting the true chaga that's grown on birch trees and then extracted, which I'll get into. There's kind of three big things you have to be aware of to make sure that your body can actually use the benefits that are hidden within these mushrooms. So that's kind of our protect highlight. I don't know if I have any cordyceps.
How much, sorry to interrupt, how much chaga would you recommend taking on a daily basis?
So here's the thing. It's a wild, wild west in the supplement industry when you're buying chaga. So maybe we'll start with what to look for, because that leads into our dosage.
Yeah.
So there's three big things to look for. One, that you're getting the fruiting body. It's kind of funny. We don't have to get too heady with it, but chaga is technically like called the sclerotium or conch. It's like a myceliated mass, but it's basically on the side of the birch tree. So what you're looking for is the fruiting body is like something you can see from your visual human eye, right? That we could actually cut off and find in nature. So reishi is a better example of like this being a true fruiting body. So that's one. Again, mycelium is amazing for lots of things like communication and remediating soil. We're doing like meat alternatives out of yada yada. But when it comes to functional mushroom benefits for your health, fruiting body is the most important aspect. This has the most compounds. It's the most concentrated form of the compounds that our body needs to have these benefits.
Because I've seen some supplements, they sell the mycelium instead of the fruiting body. So avoid mycelium.
Avoid mycelium. It's basically, you can't harvest mycelium in nature. So it's grown on typically like a grain substrate. Rice and oat are the two most common. As we mentioned, these mushrooms don't grow on grains, right? They grow on trees. And so much of what makes them the chaga or the reishi that they are compounds found in the trees that they grow on, right? So betalainic acid is something that's a really important antioxidant in chaga. That comes from betalain, which is found in the bark of the birch tree. So if you don't grow your mushrooms on wood, it's kind of like sourcing a meat, like beef that's been fed GMO soy and corn and whatever versus grass-fed. We know the nutrient quality is going to be super different, right? We are what we eat. Fungi are what they eat. So we've covered
That makes perfect sense.
The fruiting body, the mycelium. Also watch out. There's like sneaky marketing stuff happening where people are saying full spectrum. Like we use the mycelium and fruiting body, which is basically a way to say like we use like 99% mycelium and maybe like 1% fruiting body because it's way cheaper, super cheap to do mycelium, right? You can do it in a lab. The mushrooms never see the sunlight. There's not even a mushroom there, right? It's literally like tempeh. If you've ever seen tempeh,
right.
That's what mycelium is. So yeah, fruiting body grown on woods with one exception, which we'll talk about the cordyceps, but the chagas, the reishis, the lion's mane, all like most of our functional varieties should be grown on wood. And the way to ensure that is when you pick up a supplement bottle, if you look at other ingredients, make sure it doesn't say like oat or rice or some sort of grain.
Okay. Are there certain brands you would recommend? Obviously, for Sigmatic, like a lot of your like coffee, it's like infused with something else, right? Or there's additions to it. But if you want to like just a capsule of chaga or something like that, are there certain brands you'd recommend for that?
So we do have capsules that we just came out with. I made them for us last fall, so they're very, very new. But yeah, they're one of the first fully certified organic capsules, which are super cool. So we have
okay, cool.
We have 3. We have a calm, a think, and a memory. Another brand I absolutely love is called Mushroom Revival. They're super cool, use only fruiting bodies, log grown, extracted mushrooms. Real Mushrooms is another awesome brand. And yeah, the third section of our book, which we'll get to, is a whole shopping guide. So the idea is, I don't want to just preach for Sigmatic all day. Obviously, I believe we're doing it awesome. We're doing it really, really well, but so are some other brands, right? And we all have to ally and rising tides raises all ships mentality. So, and there's like more and more brands coming out. So right now, I think those are probably the top brands I'd recommend for Sigmatic, Mushroom Revival, Real Mushrooms. But more, I want people to know what to look for so that when new brands come on the market, they can be like, oh, I'm going to vet this myself, right? Is this a fruiting body? Does this have other ingredients? Does it say the word mycelium on it? And then the last thing, so fruiting body, log grown, is extraction. So it's kind of like there's many foods we need to extract to then be able to absorb their nutrients, like rice. We don't eat raw rice or like a raw chickpea, right? You like soak it and boil it. Same thing with our mushrooms. They need to be extracted for our bodies to be able to utilize their medicine, their compounds. So if we look at the mushrooms, they're super hard, right? This is like how they.
Yeah. Do they come out of the ground like that, or do they like dehydrate over time?
Well, they come out of trees, right?
Oh, sorry, those ones. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, but these have dried out a little bit, but yeah, the chaga is pretty much this hard, like right off the birch tree. The reishi is pretty hard as well. It's definitely like dried out a little bit. But what's unique about fungi is they have this compound in their cell wall called chitin. It's the same compound found in crustacean shells. So think of like a lobster, crab, shrimp shell. If we just eat that, it's going to act like a brush, right? We call it insoluble fiber, just like a brush through our intestines. And so in order to, it also makes these like, these aren't breaking down or molding or anything. These are just really shelf stable sitting in my apothecary. It's because of that chitin. It's super, super tough and durable. But it also acts like this door that we have to break open that door in order for our bodies to use all of these amazing benefits in the mushrooms. So there's 2 ways to break open that door. You can do it via hot water or through alcohol. The point is, with whichever method you use, you have to look for the word extract to make sure that your body can actually get benefits from the mushroom supplement you're buying.
Okay, so if it's alcohol or water, either one is fine, as long as it does use some extraction process.
Yeah, I'm like, you want to get how heady are we going to get today?
Well, I mean, I was on Reddit, which is sometimes not a good idea, but I was trying to find, this was like a year ago maybe, I was trying to find like a really high quality capsule. So I think this is before Four Sigmatic had your capsules, if you guys came out with them in the fall. But there's just like all these elements. Basically, if I would have had this podcast back then, I would have known instead of spending hours on Reddit. But it seemed like one of the big things, and I don't know how big of a difference it actually makes, but one thing I ended up trying to decipher was alcohol versus water extraction. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so let me break it down. So both the alcohol and the hot water are going to break open this chitin. And to keep it really simple for today, maybe we'll do like a 2.0 deep dive. There's two main groups of compounds that are found within our mushrooms. You can think of them as the oils and the sugars. Okay, so the sugars, it's a specific, don't be like scared sugar. It's a very complex polysaccharide, so complex sugar chain. The most common type found in mushrooms are these beta-D-glucans. Those beta-D-glucans are what get into our microbiome and modulate our immune system. So really important, that's the immune benefit. Now the oils, the type found in our fungi, are called triterpenes, right? So if you look at like that shiny sheen of the reishi, those are triterpenes, mushroom oils. Ganaderic acid is the kind we're looking at right here on the reishi mushroom. Oils and water are very different, right? So if we extract, think about boiling this mushroom in a bunch of water. Do you think the oils are going to come out or the sugars are going to come out?
The sugar, I would imagine.
Yeah, the sugar is going to come out because sugar is water soluble, right? Think of like making simple syrup. It's going to dissolve. Oil, not so much, right? Think about like dropping olive oil in a pot of water. It's kind of just going to sit there. So if we want a really immune supporting end product, supplement, a water extract will be just fine, right? But if we want the triterpenes, do many other things. You can think of them as really the adaptogenic aspect, the stress supporting. So if we want more of that like adaptogenic stress benefit from our reishi mushroom, we would need to have an alcohol extract, a tincture, because the tincture method is what's going to pull out those oils. So the gold standard, it's like, and this is with all of our herbal medicine based on it's called the menstruum, like the liquid that we're extracting compounds into. You're going to pull out certain compounds based on that medium that you're extracting with. With mushrooms, the gold standard is to do both. It's called a double extract. That's what we do. So it's kind of like eating the whole animal. If you eat meat, right, we're getting like the organs and the bones and like all these awesome parts. That's the double extraction. So that is what I would recommend if you want like the most value out of your mushroom supplements. And the reason we went through all of that, the fruiting body, the log grown, the extraction, the double extraction, is because when you extract this mushroom, you're concentrating it, right? Sometimes like 6x, sometimes 10x, depending on the strength of the concentration. And so an extract, the dosage is going to look very, very different than a company that's just selling mycelium grown on grain that then grinds up. It's basically like oatmeal, right? They grind up that oats with like a little bit of mycelial biomass on it and then weigh that. So if you're getting that, they're selling like 2,000 milligrams or 2 grams, 3 grams versus what we do at Four Sigmatic. Our lowest dose is 500 milligrams of the extract, which is way more, like 10x as potent, as if you were just so that you can't really compare milligram to milligram before you first have to understand what you're getting, right? You have to know that it's an extract because the weight amount is just not apples to apples.
Damn. This is so helpful. These are questions I've had for so long about this stuff because, like you said, I mean, mushrooms are now getting more trendy, so there's a lot of these brands out there. It sounds like a lot of brands that aren't doing it the right way, or they're just cheaping out and selling expensive sawdust or expensive oatmeal, basically.
Totally.
So I have one question. The capsules I've been buying are from Oravita. Have you ever heard of Oravita?
I haven't.
Oh, this is through my like hours of Reddit research. This is what I landed on. Yeah, it's like ORI Oravita, kind of how it sounds. I think it's DA. I
I'll check
think
it
it comes
out.
from. I want to say it comes from Amsterdam. Maybe their
Great.
website's a little sketchy, so I don't know. But it
He
seems.
comes from Finland, so hey.
Yeah, I need to look. I have them downstairs. I should have brought them up here, but I want to look at their like extraction process and
Yeah,
all the things you just mentioned. Make sure it's the fruiting body and everything. This
perfect.
is
Yeah,
very
check
good
it out.
information.
Right on.
Let's definitely talk about cordyceps. It seems like cordyceps are going to be probably a huge focus for endurance athletes or for
Totally.
people playing sports.
Yes, and I'll say I've worked with a lot of athletes, professional athletes. I was in Boulder. That's where I opened my private practice. Like people come from all over to train in Boulder, right? We're at like almost 6,000 feet elevation up there. And the performance piece only goes so far. You have to also nurture the chaga piece, right? That defend, keeping your system in this vital state to begin with, and the restore are equally as important to hit those performance metrics, right? So like I can't stress that enough. We'll talk about cordyceps and it's awesome and amazing ally for athletes, but long term, I'll say you will be a better athlete. You'll have more of a sustainable career in your running or whatever it is that your outlet is if you take care of the defend and the restore equally as much as that performance piece. Little
I love
fun.
that.
Okay. So cordyceps, super cool. Our performance fungi. Little history is cordyceps is found naturally about above 13,000 feet elevation. So it was originally discovered up in the Himalayas. Think like Nepal, Tibet, China, northern India region, and Sherpas would go climb up and they would herd their yaks up into the Himalayas in the early spring, and their yaks would start like munching on this little thing like in the ground they were finding in the grass, and then within minutes the yaks would go into heat, like become super horny.
Oh wow.
And these Sherpas are like, what is going on? I'm like, why do we have these horny yaks? And so they started identifying what they were eating, and they realized they were eating these cordyceps. So they collected them and they brought them down to their village and shared them with the monks, and they started checking them out and eating them and noticing what was happening. And essentially what's going on is cordyceps are vasodilators, and they can increase the amount of oxygen that our body uptakes by about 15%. So
Wow. 15%?
up to 15%. So this is massive. So, the Sherpas, what they mostly noticed is, wow, I can breathe better at higher elevations. I have more stamina. I have more endurance, which is, without having a stimulant. There isn't like a direct stimulant that's propping them up and then leading to a crash later. It's just allowing this greater oxygenation through the system, which is so important for our performance. So in the early 90s, it was 1991, there was this team of women Olympic athletes that broke all these world records in this like 1 week. And the industry came down on them and was like, you must be doping. Like, there's no way this can happen. You guys are outperforming all the other people. Like, what's going on? And they did this deep dive and realized that they were Chinese, and they realized that they were all taking cordyceps mushrooms. And so
Dang.
that kind of exploded. That was like the birth of cordyceps for the fitness world. And that was already like 33 years ago. So yeah, really amazing. They're one of the few fungi that you can feel within, most people can feel within like a few minutes of taking them, like usually 15, 30 minutes, which is really unique. A lot of like chaga, you don't really feel if your body's getting like a great dose of antioxidants. It's like amazing, but usually there's nothing you feel from it. Cordyceps are really different. So I love giving people cordyceps, especially if they don't believe in the benefits of mushrooms. I'm like, here's a real cordyceps, like extract, high dose, take it. And I check back in with them in like 15, 20 minutes. It's like, I'm ready to move. So super cool. I would try it, a couple times pre-workout. But the goal with all of this herbal medicine and fungi is that we never want to depend on anything, right? We want to use them as allies, but we never want crutches. So you never want to use any of these as a crutch. And cordyceps can potentially lend to that, because you'll notice, I'd be shocked if you didn't, but you probably notice your numbers increasing. You're like, well, I can run faster. I have more energy. I can run longer, whatever it might be. So try it pre-workout for a while, but really for those long-term benefits, take it post-workout. So I find much more sustainable results if you take it in your post-workout recovery. And then the next day when you run the next week, if you take it consistently, you'll start to naturally build, like those compounds are in your body, but you're not depending on them as a crutch to then be like, I can't run without this.
Right. So is that something, I feel like I read somewhere that you want to like cycle on and off of cordyceps, like use it for, say, like, I don't know, 2 weeks at a time, take a week off, 2 weeks at a time. Is there any merit to that?
Yeah, there's lots of different methods with cycling on and off of all adaptogens. And the way there's not like a one rule of thumb that I stick by, but really, if these are working, we'll want to switch it up. It's like if you're super stressed and you're taking reishi for a couple weeks, ideally you're not as stressed anymore. So you want to take a break to come back to baseline. And the rule of thumb I kind of do is like 3 weeks on, 3 days off, or you can do 3 months on, 3 weeks off, like cycle depending on your regimen and what you're working on. But yeah, super important to take that break, to come off, to see where you are when you're not using the functional mushroom, and then potentially mix it up. Like ideally, you're not as stressed as you were after you took something to support your nervous system for several weeks, then maybe something else is going on, right? And you want to start focusing on your focus or your physical energy or your sleep, right? And so you can pivot, and that'll be the most sustainable. Yeah.
That makes sense. So for me, maybe I don't know if you could like prescribe this per se, but so I'm training for my first 100-mile race. It'll be in the mountains in Wyoming at like 9,000 feet elevation. This is in June. Awesome. Yep. How would you recommend maybe I utilize cordyceps leading up, like during the training? I'll be in Austin, so it's close to sea level for pretty much all the training. But then during the race, I'll be at elevation. Like, what would you recommend for that?
Yeah, good question. So first thing that I'll say, instead of just like, yes, take cordyceps, is that it's really important to understand your body type when we recommend any sort of herb or mushroom, right? So we all have the elements within us, and we all basically are on a spectrum of being either hot or cold or moist or dry, right? And same with all of our plants and our fungi. So kind of an obvious example is like ginger is really hot and dry. Right? We know that it's like spicy and worming, it's hot, or like cannabis is really drying, right? That's an obvious one. Or aloe vera is like a very moistening herb. Mints are very cooling, right? So just like us, we all have this. Some of us are more moist, right? We're like prone to being sweatier. Some of us are prone to be more of a warm constitution, right? You're sitting in a room and maybe you're the one with your shirt off. Someone else has like a bundled layer on, right? So we all are on these two kind of axes of warm, cool, and moist, dry. And so are all of our plant and fungal medicines.
I'm very warm and very moist for sure, without a doubt.
And you live in Austin. So that's, that's actually not surprising. Your environment plays a big factor. Part of it is what you're born with. But there's a huge part about your environment. Like pretty much everyone in Colorado is dry. If you're living at, above 5,000 6,000 feet elevation, you're going to be dry. If you're living in a really humid, moist place like Austin, you're most likely going to be really moist. So anyways, this is where like the art of formulation comes into place, which is so important I like to say, like at Sigmatic, we don't sell single ingredients, we sell formulas to be able to have this balanced energetic. So we're not just offering something that's really going to push you in one direction or another. So I'll say that, and I would love to have you work with an herbalist for a couple weeks before this training to get like the right dialed formula for your body and your needs. But I guess like high level, you can start working with cordyceps now. I'd take it for like a week pre-workout to really feel how it's moving in your body. Then I'd take a couple days off. I think you could do like a 7 days on, 2 days off, or 5 days on, 2 days off. whatever's easiest with your schedule. I like to say the medicine doesn't work if we don't take it. So it's got to be easy. It's got to be consistent. It's got to like build off something that you already do. And I think if you start taking it after that first week of like really feeling its effects in your body, you start taking it in your recovery. So you take it after your training. And I would do that in that recovery mode for honestly a couple months. You could do on and off. You could do 3 weeks on, 3 days off might be the right protocol for you. If June is like a couple months, 4 months away, that might be the right move. And then depending, I think that'll set yourself up for success leading up to your big race. And you could do it all the way up to, the day that you set out on trail. Is it on trail or on pavement? I don't know.
It's on trail. Yeah. It's very super mountainous. So could I like theoretically just like load up on cordyceps, or is there, I'm sure there's like a limiting effect, right?
Yeah, this is a great question. There's not really a point with adaptogens where there's an overdose, right? They're balancing, right? So we're so used to in our society, like more is better. That's not necessarily the case. It's like our bodies can only utilize a certain amount at given times. So if you're totally new to taking a functional mushroom, I would start low, right? And allow your body to start using that. 500 milligrams is like a effective starting dose. So I would start there and then build up. We really see benefits plateauing at like 2,000, maybe 3,000 milligrams. So that's like 2 or 3 grams a day. That would be like a really high end. And usually our bodies can't even utilize that much. So it's more like a ceiling dose. It's like, you're only going to use so much. Right. And then if you take extra, it's kind of just like an overflow. You're not really getting anything more from that.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
But starting with 500 milligrams for at least like a week, a couple weeks. And then for you, I would build up. You can see it's always like listening to your body is so important. It sounds like taboo and woo-woo, but the point with this is everybody's different. And so that's your judge, right? We're like listening to how is this working in my body? There's not a set hard rule of like 500 milligrams for this amount of time, 1,000 for this. It's like, okay, we might need to tamper you back or boost you up a little bit. And only your body is going to be the one to understand and share. So that's what I mean. Listen to your body, not to be woo-woo, but to really say, okay, and body is laboratory, right? You can experiment, like try a little higher for a few days, see how you feel. Then try like a much smaller dose. Maybe at a smaller dose, your body's going to utilize that more efficiently than if you just slam, too much at once. So yeah, I would try both, but yeah, 500 milligrams is like a good starting place of an extract. And then 1,500 milligrams is really, if you're going to be doing this for several weeks or several months, that's kind of the range I would suggest sticking within.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I mean, listening to your body, I mean, in fitness, like the more I get into it, that's like the number one thing, right? Because there's these training plans and there's these nutrition plans and there's all these protocols that everybody has, but like you got to maybe use them as a baseline to start and then adjust and really find that intuition with your own body. So it sounds like there's plenty of crossover there. What other herbs / adaptogens / mushrooms would you recommend for performance purposes?
Schizandra is a really amazing one. We talk about it in the book. It's actually a berry. It's called the 5-flavor berry, really traditional Chinese medicine. That's incredible for endurance, super, super rich in key vitamins, things like vitamin C. That's really important for, especially when we're stressed, we burn through vitamin C really quickly. So the last thing we want you to be doing is getting sick or, having that stress, not being able to be moved through your body efficiently when you're training. So Schizandra is a great endurance option. Otherwise, the nutrition is so important. I think that's equally as important as what herbs you're supplementing with, right? Because the way I think about it is all from this like constituent level. Like what is your body deficient in and how can we replenish with either the food or the herbs based on what you need. And so, yeah, I really think it's so body dependent. of looking at what is your diet, where are you living, right? And balancing your body to be the optimal you, right? And the optimal you is going to be different when you're living in Austin and training for a race than if you're living in Wyoming and, I don't know, like getting married and being really leisurely or being really stressed, right? There's going to be different things, different nutrients your body needs at those given times.
Yeah. So the Schizandra berry, are there extracts or there like powder forms of that, or would you recommend just like eating the berry itself?
No, I would do an extract powder form for sure. The berry itself is wild. You can just like pop it in your mouth and you literally will experience all 5 flavors
Wow.
as you like suck on the berry. So it's like sour and then it's sweet and then it's bitter and then it's like it's wild.
Have you had one before?
Oh yeah, many times. Yeah,
Where do you
they're
get them from?
Mountain Rose Herbs is a great kind of like online bulk supply for herbs. There's a couple others, Frontier Co-op, Star West Botanicals. We can link if people want to, in the
Definitely, yeah.
notes. But yeah, I think the most effective form. I think I had a bag, but yeah, it's like a extracted powder of Schizandra is going to be super easy, and you could throw that into a smoothie is probably the easiest way, but get creative, right? It's like I like to make little like energy balls, and you can do that with like nut butters or whatever powders you like. So yeah, you can mix it in and just drink it like a tea. Again, do what works for you, right? The most expensive supplements we buy are the ones that we don't take. So make sure it
That's
makes
right.
I'd rather yeah.
I was gonna ask you about ginseng. When we were in Bali in like 2020, we were getting this acupuncture, and the acupuncturist afterwards, he came up. He's like, "You seem like you might need this." He gave me I can't remember if it was like a shot of ginseng or like a gummy. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was some dose of ginseng.
Okay.
And he's like, "You look like you need this," and this might be too much information, but my libido was pretty wild for like a couple hours afterwards.
Yeah.
And I listened to that part in the book, and I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Because I remember him saying something about libido or like making jokes to like Brie, my fiance, or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's like woo woo, whatever. But it seems like there's legitimacy to that.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I wouldn't recommend ginseng for you. Ginseng is on the most stimulating, kind of like aggressive side of our adaptogens. And so it can really like give you a kick and give you this pep in your step, which you want to be careful with the stimulating adaptogens, because if you're really stressed or depleted and you take ginseng every day, you're going to feel really good. You're going to be like, oh, I have my energy, I have my libido, like I'm grooving. But again, if you're not addressing what's going on underneath of why you were feeling deficient in the first place, it's just a crutch, right? It's just a Band-Aid. So ginseng is really, I feel like it's most suited for kind of an older, like mid 60s, 70s, 80s, who needs that stronger kick to kind of bring their life force back. Otherwise, I would recommend actually a more gentle adaptogen to naturally get your libido to the place that it wants to be, your energy or your endurance. I also want to call out that the word ginseng is used a lot, and there's very few true ginsengs. So now you'll find, there's American ginseng, there's Asian ginseng, there's Siberian ginsengs, there's all these other ginsengs. And what's really helpful in our book, or if in other resources, is to find the Latin name. And this might sound like I don't want to do that, but if you find the Latin name, it's essentially the true name of that plant. Right. So no matter where you are in the world, it's like if we go and travel the world, you're Jeremy in Austin, you're also Jeremy in Bali, right? I'm Danielle Dawson in California. I'm also Danielle Dawson no matter where I go, but we might have nicknames based on those cultures, right? So like when I'm in Thailand, they can't pronounce my name Danielle, so they call me D, right? So same thing with our plants. There's the true botanical name, which is like your true full name. And then there's these nicknames that the same species can be called something different. Like we call this reishi in China, they call this lingxi. The Latin name is Ganoderma lucidum. So with ginsengs, you want to make sure that you look at the Latin name to know what you're getting, because basically a lot of people throw out the word ginseng and it's not actually a ginseng.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what are they getting? Is it just like a different strain, or like is it like what would they be getting if it wasn't the true ginseng?
Yeah, so it's not like it's bad if you're not getting it. So, for example, like Siberian ginseng, it's a totally different species, but we've used the nickname ginseng because it has similar actions or benefits to what that original Asian ginseng gives the body. So yeah, like rhodiola rosea, which is this really cool. I keep looking. I want to like show you a physical example.
You got everything back there.
Put everything back here. So this is like this really cool root, rhodiola, that can be referred to.
Do you have cordyceps in there? After you show me this, I really would love to see cordyceps if you have any.
So cordyceps is super interesting, and I'll share a little bit. If people watched,
What was it? The Last of Us? They're going to be like, oh my God, cordyceps. So cordyceps is the one exception to mushrooms growing on trees, on wood. Cordyceps in the wild, actually, it's really crazy, but it's a parasitic mushroom. It lands its spores on different insects, and it essentially uses the insect's body as its substrate, as its food source. So it eats the insect from the inside out and then grows the fruiting body out of the insect's head, kills it from the inside out. Really
That's wild.
really wild. Google like BBC cordyceps. There's a wild couple-minute clip that will just blow your mind.
Say that again. What was it called?
It's like the BBC cordyceps clip, and you can just watch. And it's like, that David Attenborough voiceover and the cordyceps mushroom. Super cool. But that's actually really unsustainable. Cordyceps, gram for gram, has become more than the price of gold. So that's actually, when we talk about like wild crafted, never get wild. Not that anyone would ever like spend that much to afford it. But if you see wildcrafted cordyceps, it's mostly a scam. So almost all cordyceps is actually cultivated. And you can cultivate cordyceps on different substrates. Like they don't need wood, right? You can cultivate cordyceps on like a rice, for example, and infuse that rice with similar compounds that it grows on, and it's like looking for in the insects that it grows on in the wild. Wild cordyceps like super it's like inhumane and unsustainable, so you want to have a cultivated variety, but because of that, I don't know if I have just like the little cordyceps mushrooms. I have the powder is how I source it, right? So it's the extracted powder, but maybe we'll link a show notes with like what the true cordyceps looks like.
Is there, it probably is similar to like fruit, I would imagine. Like an apple that you get at the grocery store today is going to be way different than an apple that would like just grow on a tree in the middle of a field, or like a blueberry you'd go pick off of a bush in like Maine is going to be different from a blueberry at the grocery store.
Yes.
Is there differences, I would imagine, between like a wild mushroom or a wild fungi versus like a capsulated, like even if you have like the fruiting body, it's grown on wood, you have the proper extraction process, like is there differences there?
Massive. Yeah. So where the fungus or where the plant grows has a huge influence on the quality and what compounds will end up in that species. So really important. There's all this like US grown mushrooms. We don't have any history or like tradition of growing mushrooms in this country. We don't know how to do it. A lot of these mushrooms aren't native to our country. And so there's this big, with validation, but people are typically pretty scared of ingredients that come from China. A lot of our functional mushrooms, they're Chinese medicines. They're traditional Chinese medicines. That's where they grow. That's where they're from. Really, really important to get your mushrooms, your adaptogens from their native countries. All right. So like rhodiola grows in some of the most extreme climates on Earth, like Iceland, Mongolia. This version here is from Iceland. But a lot of those, this is a whole field called xenohormesis, where essentially the environmental factors that this species is growing in influence the compounds that are concentrated in that fruiting body or in that root, right? So like with the rhodiola, it's exposed to really high and low temperatures and different soil types and all of these environmental stressors. And so the root itself is really resilient, right? It's like been able to tolerate all of these stressors. And when we take rhodiola, we experience similar benefits, right? We feel this resilience, this ability to combat stressors. It's not like the stressors go away, but we have more tools to be able to be less affected by the stressors, be less like on this stress roller coaster. So yeah, with all of that's why our chaga, we get it from Siberia, right, where it's found in the wild. So really important to get especially adaptogens from the environments that they're natively growing in.
Dang. I know you said you had an hour and a half. Are we like short on time? It's 4:28 Central, so I think 2:28 your time.
Yeah, we're short on time.
Okay. Do you have to go in like 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, shoot. I have so many more questions I want to ask you. Real quick, this is from my fiance. She wanted to know, are there mushrooms or adaptogens you'd recommend for like sleep specifically? She like wakes up in the middle of the night. She has like I guess like a panic attack sometimes in the middle of the night. Like, is there things you'd recommend to help get better sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of brings us to the restore category, which is our reishi mushroom. Reishi isn't sedative in any way, so it's not like going to knock you out, but it does profoundly, it's a heart cardiovascular tonic, and it is really effective at relaxing our nervous system, which is often a reason that we're kept up at night and not able to sleep. Ashwagandha is another one, really, really wonderful to support sleep. Its Latin name, Withania somnifera. Somnifera actually is sleep inducing in Latin. So you could do like a reishi ashwagandha evening brew, evening tea, and those would probably be kind of the two key players for that sleep support.
Amazing. I have so many other questions I want to ask you, but I know you got to go. Maybe we'll do a part 2 or something. Or if you ever come through Austin, we'll have to do a part 2 because I'm telling you, I have so many other questions. I love this stuff. So, but as a whole, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge. I think people are going to get a ton of great information out of this. Where is the best place for people to connect with you and find you if they wanted to?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much. This was so fun. Time flew by. Could talk about mushrooms all day, all night. You can find me at Danielle Ryan Wellness is my website, or on social platforms at Danielle Ryan Dawson. And then, of course, our brand at for Sigmatic on social, and then forsigmatic.com.
Heck yeah. And the book, Healing Adaptogens.
Yeah.
Don't forget about that.
Yeah, you can go to healingadaptogens.com, or you can buy the book anywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you name it.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you for coming on. I feel like we're ending this so short, but I know you got to go. I'm so bummed. That's okay. It just means we got to do part 2.
Exactly.
All right. Heck yeah. Well, thanks for coming on.
Me.
Of course. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.